This is my question to two preachers. Why hasn't Jesus answered the prayers of African Americans on this side of the grave? This is Audio Stories with J.B. Simeon. This is a question for two African American preachers. I heard two African American preachers who are supporters of Donald Trump disparage African American support for the Democratic Party. In their belief, African Americans support the Democratic Party because they're brainwashed and they have a master and slave mentality, which they refer to as slaves on the Democratic plantation. In their thoughts, African Americans have loyally supported the Democratic Party en masse since the 1960s and have very little to show for their support. African Americans still face high unemployment, subjugation in school and housing, social discrimination, and a host of other societal problems. They believe that this is because African Americans vote en masse for the Democratic Party. They feel that Democratic politicians have little incentive to alleviate the problems of the African American community if the African American vote is unconditionally granted to the Democrats. They say, why would the Democratic politicians do anything to help? Where else can African Americans go? The preachers feel that African Americans are captives of their own ignorance. Further, since the Republican Party doesn't receive the support of African Americans, Republicans have no incentive to be concerned with the needs of the African American community. Their solution calls for African Americans to swing their votes to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party based upon who made the best case for their support. African Americans would in fact become a large swing vote that politicians would have to pursue to be elected. In theory, this would be advantageous. However, I believe this plan would fail for two reasons. First, African Americans do not coordinate their votes on issues en masse based upon some signal from a central authority. They vote to support issues that help them advance as individual citizens. Second, it ignores the reality of why there is so much popular support for the Democratic Party by African Americans. Democrats generally support issues that help African Americans advance. Republicans generally support issues that undermine their progress. For more than 50 years, Republican politicians have been successful at racially scapegoating African Americans in elections by exploiting the racial fears of white Americans. Further, Republicans refuse to support economic and social policies that would assist economically disadvantaged Americans in achieving higher levels of economic security. Republicans and their corporate Democratic allies support winner-take-all economic policy that disadvantages the economically insecure and weakens political efforts to strengthen the social safety net. I feel that if the Republican Party wants to receive a higher share of the economically disadvantaged vote, which includes many African Americans, they must champion progressive political and economic policies that help this country strengthen the social safety net and eliminate racial anxiety. In final thought, it occurred to me that the preachers had no difficulty in blaming Democratic politicians and African Americans for the condition of the African American community after 50 years of effort. My question to them is, after hundreds of years of loyal support for Jesus and the Christian church by African Americans in the United States, why hasn't Jesus answered the prayers of African Americans and the economically disadvantaged for better opportunities in America on this side of the grave? That concludes the story of a question for two African American preachers. I'm J.B. Simeon. I hope that you have enjoyed this audio story. If you would like to hear more stories, please subscribe now to this channel and like us below. There will be many more stories to come. Thank you and take care.